Oh, no, not yet. Not.
Watch out, I'm coming up. I was doing something. Did you introduce me?
Greg LeMond.
I'm sorry, you didn't introduce me.
No, it's fine. So, Ken will be super happy about this because we've now taken the attention away from him, but thanks once again.
I apologize. I was distracted and I thought you called me up.
Greg, have a seat.
I apologize. I'm sorry.
So, I was going to tee up this talk by I'm going to say these words anyway. I mean, Greg LeMond, to a certain generation of misty-eyed cycling fans, this man is the individual who got us into the sport, who made us passionate about the sport, who lived the stories that engaged us, back in the mid-1980s. No exaggeration to say that.
That's the gray-haired people here he's talking about. So.
Yeah, we're kind of misty-eyed and slightly emotional, the slightly wobbly voices from the emotion. And it's very fair to say, Greg, that you changed the sport. And as cycling fans of my generation, we watched that sport changing. We kind of lived it through you. And subsequent cycling fans, if there are any younger fans here who weren't lucky enough and fortunate enough to watch those mid-1980s and late 1980s tours, go find them on YouTube and read about Greg, because Greg just revolutionised cycling in so many different ways. And just before I do my introduction for our next guest.
Oh my God, I really blew it because we were looking for something. We heard this. I think, okay, we got to go up.
I want to read a quote from the ex-cycling pro and cycling writer Paul Kimmage, who he may be a Marmite fixer on, but he is an excellent writer. And he said these words in one of his books. He said, and the situation was, Paul was with a teammate doing a training ride. The weather was crappy, and it was the hard yards of being a professional. I think they were underpaid at the time, and they weren't feeling that great about life. And he leaned over to his teammate and said, "In my next life, I want to come back as LeMond. I want to be born in California with legs like Eddie Merckx and looks like Robert Redford." Ladies and gentlemen, Greg LeMond.
Wow. A lot of Photoshop.
And still as good looking as Robert Redford, I'm sure.
That's a lot of Photoshop there, man.
Yeah. So you were the first non-European to win the Tour de France, and you were one of the early pioneers. I mean, there were Australians and
Sean Kelly, Irish, Sean right Kelly, here. You see
met early on coming through the sport. But you need to just tell us about your path into the sport, because these days you get talent identified and put on a conveyor belt through the junior ranks, through the under-23s, into the sport. Bish, bash, bosh, very easy, but wasn't like that for you. So how was it?
I mean, I tried to do it that way, actually. But interesting you say that, because I was, first of all, I never, knew what the Tour de France was when I started cycling. My dad and I started riding to get in shape for skiing, and met a guy at a bike shop who asked if I thought of racing. No, and then he invited me to a club race, and I got second, and then I went to my next race and won it, and it was like, okay, that's it. You would start winning something and winning some prizes. I'm actually making money as a bike rider. It was crazy. I mean, the only sport in the world you can get $150. I mean, 14 years old and you get a $150 prize. It's like crazy. So you're not only winning, but you get rewarded to do it. So I was hooked. But I was actually really pretty good. I won my first 11 races, and actually I wasn't really about victories. I asked permission to race in the junior category with the restricted gear, and I didn't win a race that year, but I was second a lot, and it was weird, because why would a 14, 15-year-old kid, why wouldn't I want to win all the races? But this is kind of, I think, what in my mind has always been, it wasn't about the amount of victories, about the challenge. And you'll hear a lot of people, like, it's funny because I met with Laurent Fignan's second wife, who said he had to hate me. Like, he had to hate me. Like, what? He had to hate me. That motivated him for winning. And that wasn't my motivation, it was the challenge. But anyways, I was really good, and I won most, and then the next year I won almost every race I entered in the US as a junior. Then I asked to race in the amateur level. But at that time, in America, is always like Europeans are so much better, almost like they're genetic freaks. And then the following year, my third year, I was invited by a friend that I met in my first race, Kent Gordis, who wrote a book with me. He's been in TV, Encyclopedia of Cycling History. His dad lived in Switzerland, so I got to stay with that family. We took me to the two top races in Switzerland as junior, France, and then I spent 3 weeks in Belgium, raced 8 races, and then I went to Poland. But I won every race except for one in Belgium, and I crashed in the Polish race, got 3rd overall. But so here I am, a kid that's like, well, Eddie Merckx had to put his pants on just like me, and if I'm as good as any Belgian at that time, why can't I dream of being at the Tour? And the first time I saw the Tour de France was a stage on the Jouplan, I rode with Jean-Claude Keely from Geneva to a chalet, and I saw that. It was like, wow, it was breathtaking, and it was such a powerful moment, but that's what I wanted to do, and I came home and wrote 4 little goals that I still have. I don't know where the original is, but I have a photo of it. But it was like to win the Junior World National Championships that next year, the Olympics, World Championships by the time I'm 22, Tour de France by the time I'm 25. I was already aspiring to be like copying Eddie Merckx's career. But in 79 I won the Junior World Championships, but I just met somebody today from Holland. I said, yeah, I went in the winter of 79-80, I went to 6 days of Rotterdam to Maastricht to meet with Peter Post, trying to turn pro, and I was still a junior the following year. And I've been waiting, and I'm sitting there waiting to meet Peter Post. And Peter Post, I don't know if anybody, he was a director of the Raleigh team. Blue eyes, super tall, like a cinema star. He comes in, looks at me, pulls out his card and says, kid, come back in 5 years when you're ready. And so, okay, I flew back, and the following year I won a race in France, went with Guimard, but I think 5 or 6 years later, he said that was the worst mistake I ever made. But, I was at that wanting to fast track it I turned pro at 19.
Yeah.
But I had to do it myself. Today you have like scouts. They're looking for the riders, the talent, and they are moving them right away. And that's what Pogacar.
Yeah, it was highly, highly unusual, because I think it was the Circuit de la Sarthe that you won as an
amateur, yeah.
As an amateur. And then turning pro.
Which that was a time, there were 2 races in the year that were pro-am, because at that time the Russians were, Eastern Bloc were really pros, but they're amateurs. And then 2 races, the Tour de l'Avenir and Circuit de la Sarthe were open, so pros and Eastern Bloc. Yeah, so that was, I beat the Russians. And the Russians there next week, the Russian race. It's so funny, Americans and Russians.
This to happen in the 1980s, obviously, like the political context between USA and...
The irony is, we boycotted. I didn't go to the Olympics because of Afghanistan. Then we went to Afghanistan later. But
we said we didn't talk about politics.
But actually, Afghanistan and Ukraine, it's pretty sad to think about that.
Yeah. And was turning pro at 19, which was highly unusual at the time, was that intimidating at all?
It wasn't. I mean, I was driven to do it. I mean, in fact, the year before, when I was 18, I think I was a junior. What am I talking about? 79. I did a race called the Red Zinger Classic. It was the first big stage race. It was a 10-day stage race in Colorado, and they had European riders. And I would have won it if I didn't crash in the last day. But no, I was driven, and in retrospect, I go, God, I came in and turned pro, and Guimard had me pushing big gears and all this volume, and I think I was slower my first couple of years as a pro than I was as a junior. And that's what I watch riders today. I mean, at the time, it was like, you shouldn't do the Tour until you're ready to win, or let's say 23, 24. And I bought into that, but I didn't believe it, because I did this 10-day race, and I actually went to cinemas, walked around that you couldn't do, and I had no problem. So I really believed that you could do that at a younger age. But at the time, Guimard wanted to prepare me for the Tour. And going with the Renault team was the first real team that kind of went from the old style of single leader to multiple leaders. And so I ended up racing as a teammate a lot of times instead of racing for myself. But I was a little nervous going with Hino, but he was a hero of mine. So it turned out to be the best team for me to get to. It was an incredible team. And you talk about innovation. I mean, it really was the Renault team at that time was the top team in cycling. Hino had won 3 tours at the time I turned pro, maybe 4. 4. Yeah, 4. But Guimard, they were already doing studies on seat height, which most seats were that much lower, seat height, power, and aerodynamics, and with Renault. And there were aerodynamics. How much you see today, I mean, if you look back in 84 and 85, what we had, probably just as aerodynamic as today's helmets. So he was really he made a mindset, and that's the beauty of cycling, unlike running. If you aren't into the equipment and technical stuff, you'd be a runner, because like the beauty is that machine physical interaction. So when I won the Tour in 1989, I had triathlon bars, and talking to Fignon, he always said, hey, you lost 12 seconds here, 12 seconds there, lost there. And I said, no, you lost because you didn't have triathlon bars. We had the same coach, and it was always about the selection of equipment. And that was that, for me, it opened my eyes to it was very important, equipment and aerodynamics. In fact, aerodynamics is everything in cycling.
And you said that was the best team for you. And of course, it also went perfectly fine with Eno.
Well, it really did, as on Renault. And, excuse me, I got a little runny nose here. But Eno truly was an exceptional teammate, leader. I mean, he was, imagine Eddie Merckx helping somebody else win a race, either it's me or Fignon. But I remember like the Dauphiné, my first year in Dauphiné, I was third place. I ended up losing a little time, but I had massive allergies in the Giro and the Dauphiné, but I could not breathe. He literally pushed me at the back of the backside of the Ventoux. So this was the deception. I just say going down the future, part of the hard part was he was like a brother. I mean, he was a really good person and a really good team leader. So that's one little period. But imagine 18 years old, and I got this offer from Renault, and Cyril Guimard and Hinault, who was the big star in Europe, flew to Reno, Nevada to meet me. I went running with him for an hour. I mean, that's pretty exceptional. He's an exceptional, a good person.
Yeah.
So we were just, it's like a box. You get in the ring, you fight, and then race is over.
Yeah. And you did find success fairly early as a pro. You won the World Championships in '83. Can you tell us about that victory?
Yeah, I mean, it was fun. So 83 actually an interesting story, because I was racing. I won the Dauphiné that year. I don't know what I did in the Tour of Switzerland. I had a good Tour of Switzerland, but Hino was out that year for a knee injury, and Guimard asked me to do the Tour because he wasn't going to do it. And I just was focused. I had all my years set for the World Championships. That was our goal in the beginning. And I bought into the idea. I mean, maybe this is too much too soon. And what I know now, it would not have been. And Fignon ended up doing it and winning the race because there was no Hino. And I do go, God, I wish I would have taken that opportunity, because it was a year. I don't know who would have won, but I think I was as good or better than Fignon. I do believe that. I mean, my first year in the Tour in '84, I was third. He won it in a dominant way, but I was on antibiotics most of the race, so I felt like I would have had a good year. But it's interesting, that year you have these decisions to make, but my focus was the World Championships, and I had a very good program. Guimard had real physiology backgrounds and came from this guy named Paul Coakley, sports science, and he had a program 8 weeks out. You do this cycles of intensity, volume, intensity in 2 weeks before you taper, and it's worked really well for me. And 2-3 days before the race, I was riding with Phil Anderson, and I was dropping him like I couldn't breathe. I came back, and I'm like, I could drop him any moment. And I'm like, I told my wife, I'm feeling really good, because you taper and you're kind of doing short intense. But 3 days before, I did an effort that's really pretty intense, and I was just flying. So I got so nervous for the race the night before, and we're staying. It was in near Zurich, Altenrhein, and we were staying in Germany. And I could not sleep. I didn't sleep. I was so nervous. And then I got up at 5 to eat breakfast, and I put part of it down and threw it up. So I show up at the start of the race, and I see Guimard, and I'm terrified now. I'm starting to tell myself I'm not going to do well, and I'm going. He goes, "How's it going?" I said, "I didn't sleep at all, and I haven't eaten. I don't know I don't think I'm going to feel good." He goes, and he just put his hand on my shoulder. He said, "Greg, all great rides, all great exploits are done with no sleep. You're not sleeping because you know you can do it." And literally, like 2 seconds later, I'm like, "I feel good." That's the power. That's a great coach, though. Really, that's his strength. I mean, I don't know who's the best director today, but at that time, he was so far above of anybody, and for many years. But he was more of a psychologist. He knew that everybody's individual, and knew how to motivate them. But anyways, I felt really good that day, and It was, the year before I was second in the world in front of Sean Kelly. Where is he? No. No, we were just doing some interviews, and we were talking about world champions. I beat him in '89, but I told how many races he's won. He shouldn't complain. I'd like to have a lot of his victories. But the year before, I broke my collarbones, and I had a good world championships there. But it wasn't that hard of a circuit. But the next year was my type of circuit. It was like in 1989 when I won in Chambéry. I loved it, circuit, hard climb. And it was nice at that time. In the worlds today, it's a different format. It's kind of a road race with some circuits. But at that time, the circuit really served me well because I didn't have a team. So I could I always rode off the Italians. You knew that there was a breakaway. The Italians will chase them back. So as an American with no team, it really favored, type of course favored me because I could calculate where the breaks were and calculate attacks or if I have to chase down versus say point to point where you're not really tracking people. So it worked in my favor, and I did pretty well. I was second in 83, 82, 83 I won it, 85 I was second. I think I was third or something like that. I can't remember in 19, a couple of world championships, but I love that format.
Yeah. And the funny thing is like the reputation you had because of the way things worked out later in your career, the reputation was that you focused everything on the Tour and the Worlds, but you actually, in the early part of your career, you competed in the classics.
But I didn't focus on those.
Right. But you
to
raced them
be very clear, because I told Sean Kelly, because I said, Sean, how many years did it take as a pro to you really get started doing well in the classics? 8 years as a pro. And my teammate, Gilbert Duclasal, 14 attempts to win his first Paris-Roubaix. I went to Belgium after my first trip there in 78. I went back for 6 weeks for the whole purpose of riding cobblestones and learning to race in the wind. So my goal, I had one major difference between everybody else in cycling. I was nearly killed in a hunting accident in 1987, which changed the direction of my career. And all I know is that if I look at that timeline, I barely came back by 89. And I won it. In the 1990, I won it, and I had mono. So I had 2 good years. In 91, I would say I was as good as 1986, and I ended up getting 7th. But that was the year. But that was the year of EPO, and so my career had a big break there. And so if you 87 didn't do it, 88 was injured. So 89, I barely made it to the Tour. 1990, I had mono. So those are long years with nothing. And fortunately, the Tour's in July, and it does give you time. If you do have injuries or sickness, you can get there, but definitely not on purpose. I do. This is maybe a little side story, but in 1990 I had mono, and I didn't know it was wrong. Here I'm, world champion, and I remember the 3 days of Depont in Belgium. People were so pissed because then I signed a very big contract, which in cycling is bad if you made money. So I was getting dropped in every race. I couldn't figure out why. But I was spit on. I had rocks thrown on me. And I went to Brussels to a hospital, and they said, they did a test. I had mono, Epstein-Barr. So I went back and took almost 5 weeks of really low volumes, short, intense sprints. And I started coming back. And so by the time I hit the Tour there, I still wasn't really at my very best. I kind of rode into that race. But Claude Criquillon, which a stage before the Les Ardennes, which I took almost all this time back in Kipuchi, I just read this interview, and he was so pissed off that, Greg, he's so insulted by my performance that I sat back and playing golf in the United States, taking a vacation. Here he comes with no, basically from vacation to winning it. And God, if I would definitely be better than Merckx, Pogacar, all combined if that was the case. Because to win the Tour with no training, it would be crazy. But, that was the perception. That's kind of the stuff that gets established. Oh, that's my reputation. I just focus on the Tour. So there are physical reasons and career setbacks that were that reason.
But you did get results in the classics, and you were good at them. You've had top 10s at Roubaix, at Flanders, at Milan-San Remo. You came close to winning.
Damn, Sean Kelly again. Tour Lombardy second. I love Sean because he's the most understated, quiet, modest rider, but he was so good. And he just had a really great sprint. but he was the classic, they call him the Flanders guy. He was that. He was the tough guy.
You just mentioned salaries, actually. I mean, salaries have vastly improved in cycling, especially in the modern era.
But relative to other sports, it's still way behind.
It is indeed. But you signed the first contract that was for $1 million, or
yeah. I just talking about early today.
That was over a few years as well. So, but you did you started to get the salaries raised.
But it's interesting. I did it just by accident. So, but I did. Coming from America, I mean, American sports, they always talked about people's contracts. But when I turned pro, it was like you don't talk about it. And they told me I was the highest paid neo-pro they ever signed. Well, I actually made as an amateur in 1980. I had sponsored Avocet and other. I made $30,000. I looked at the calculator. It's over $100,000 in today's money, $115,000, and I signed a pro contract for $12,000. And so I found out I was probably the lowest paid. So other riders were double, like 12,000 euros. So the sport purposely wanted to keep things, not talk about, because they wanted to keep riders' salaries down. And I mean, it's a hard sport because there's no revenue outside of sponsorship, so it is a balance. But as a recruitment in 1984 by Bernard Tapie, who formed a new team called La Claire with Bernard Hinault, that it was really the start because he announced it to the public. I didn't. And I say it's funny how salaries really went up because he announced that he signed a $1 million contract. Well, it's $1 million over 3 years. That's $330,000. And I heard that when Stephen Roach won, everybody assumed I made $1 million a year. And I believe, I heard this, that, well, Greg won the Tour and he got $1 million. I want $1 million, or $1.2 million. And so then Delgado won it the next year and he wants $1.3 million. So then by 1989, I made sign for $2 million a year. And it wasn't me, it was that Bernard Tapie should be credited for that because he announced it. And so it was, I mean, sadly, Eddie Merckx at the top of his career made maybe $150,000, and relative to other sports, it's really it's a tough sport.
Yeah. And that La Claire team, that was the equivalent of the modern equivalent is UAE Emirates or Jumbo Visma, Visma Lease bike, sorry, and it was a super team, wasn't it? It was so good, but it wasn't just it had very gifted riders, but it seemed to be more advanced in terms of marketing and sports science. So can you speak a bit about what made that team so good?
Well, actually, the super dominant team was Renault. Hinault was out, but in '84 we were first and third and won 10 stages. And that was really Guimard who picked really young talent. That's really at the time he picked Fignon, myself, and Hinault, and we won 10 tours between one director. And it really was, I respect Hinault as a physical athlete, but tactically he's not that. I mean, I tactically a much better racer than he is, but Guimard was very good at tactics, and he would have been Guimard would have been great in this era because I knew the tactics, but guys like Hinault needed some instruction. So that's really what Guimard's strength was. And then when I went to Renault, it was the next super team because I got pulled away from Fignon. Otherwise, that would have maintained the status. But it was a great team. And so the science, so it's interesting because I've been following, I'm passionate about physiology. I've used a power meter. I was one of the first athletes to use it in 1992. And I know intimately power and relative to, part of it is my health issue. I really got, at the end of my career, actually when I got on a power meter, it just answered so many things. But Renault was the first team to actually introduce kind of structured scientific training. And that came from Guimard and Paul Coakley, who had a school in Switzerland. He attended that. So he implemented some of the principles of physiology. I mean, microcycles, macrocycles. And when I went from Renault to La Claire, I was given basically a book this thick, but it was printed out, of physiology. I mean, the whole citrus cycle, ATP, and what sprints, like sprints or ATP, anaerobic ergoses. So I truly, it was, Guimard put it in practice. I learned why we do it in that year. And I wrote a book the next year called The Complete Book of Cycling. And this is why I hear all these things, that things have changed. I mean, diet's changed. It hasn't, unless somebody knows some new study. Like ketones, they talk about ketones. Well, new study shows that it lowers performance by 3%. So everybody jumps on something just because somebody a pro takes doesn't mean it's actually makes you better. I mean, even the more you understand it, I mean, vitamins, there's only about 5 vitamins that actually have an impact if you eat well. But anyways, but with Coakley, I wrote this book, and I look at it now, I'd reduce the volumes, I'd change the gearing, I'd do probably shorter, less volume. But in 2014, Lauren Tandem, which is a pro, he came up to me and he said, God, I found this book in Holland in 2008. So this is the best training book I've ever had. This is the one I use. And so it wasn't like a miracle deal, but it was based on physiology. And that's what I realized in talking to Sean tonight. I mean, at the time, it was really important to understand this training. The reality of racing is you train to simulate racing intensities. And at the time, we did 100 races. So you did get there with racing, but with proper training, you can prepare yourself before you get into the season. And understand the basic physiology, you realize when you have to rest too. The most important thing is rest in training. Everybody talks about how much volume you do, but you got to rest too. But anyways, I was really blessed to have that. But even today, it's just part of my DNA. If I get into something, I will read everything I can to learn about it. If I'm not interested, that's why in school I would do really well in stuff I was interested in. Other stuff I could barely stay awake. But but it helped me in cycling. I mean, it did. I love that part. And even today, I mean, we were talking about Pogačar and how many watts per kilo can they be doing. They must be doing this, doing that. And I know my data really well. And really, I'm just going to say this because it was a question earlier tonight. And I could say I'm an outspoken anti-doping. And, some of the things like with Armstrong, it wasn't like, I just said he's cheating. I literally got firsthand evidence what he was doing, and I saw the physiology of him as his VO2 max. So it wasn't like he was just doing EPO. It had something that was making up a 20-30% increase in performance. It was that big of a difference. So that was really, then it was his bullying, and it really was, I'd made some benign comment, and he came after me, so he threatened me. But, I try to give people the benefit of the doubt. And say, Pogačar, to believe that just because you're pro, you have the same talent. I mean, there's once every generation, there's one or two riders that, sometimes you might not have that, but if you look at Merckx and Hino, let's say our era, there's Finney and myself, there are riders that are more talented, period. And so if you got a Pogačar, if I looked at my VO2 max and my watts per kilo on average, and I didn't have a power meter before that, but I averaged, let's say 5.9 watts per kilo. So 400 watts up a climb, 68 kilos, at a 45% hematocrit. Like the average hematocrit in the 80s for pro riders was 43%. Now it's I think in late 90s, it became a 50% hematocrit. So you could either EPO it to get there, or you go altitude training. And a lot of the riders spend a lot of time at altitude, which is very encouraging. That means they're doing it in a natural way. So 50% hematocrit is not that far off from somebody taking EPO, that period of Pontani. So if I have 5.9 watts per kilo and I go, what is a 45% to 50% boost? That's a significant amount. So is it 10%? That would give me almost 6.4 watts per kilo. But let's say 6.2, 6.3. I'm getting there. But if you look at today, the peloton, today I truly believe there's part of the reason there's multiple things I think they're going faster. Aerodynamic bikes, part of it. Better pavement, part of it. But the basic thing is the riders today, forced upon by the teams, the stress and weight to power ratio has always been there. But if you see some of the riders, they do not look like the same species of humans than I was racing. There is no muscle mass up here. So I look at riders, I'm about 178. I see riders 180, 185, but 60 kilos. I was 68 kilos. And so I looked at Vingegaard. I was watching, because there's motor doping. I know too much about it, and the telltale signs high RPMs, and I don't see that with riders. I mean, it's into the 90 RPMs, and now I heard Pogačar's higher RPMs, but he went to 165 cranks, which is the right thing to do. I tried to convince Quintana to go to 160s in 2014. They thought it was crazy, but longer cranks are not the advantage. And anyways, but lower, shorter cranks, you need higher RPMs. So there's all these speculation. But with Vingegaard, I go, okay, he's my height. And his mom said he did 96 VO2 max. And I go, okay, what would he be at 58 kilos? So he's 5.7 liters. Now I had 6.4. But let's say I had one specific test at 6.4, 6.2. That's a big difference. But he is 10 kilos lighter than me. So I go 92, he goes to 96 because he's literally 10. So what would I be like 5 kilos less? And so you look at a Vingegaard and a Pogacar, I think it's not unthinkable to see what they're doing. So it's in the realm of possibilities. And so I kind of go, Pogacar is a freaking freak. I mean, first year tour, he won the first tour. I mean, he might be the best cyclist ever. So, and I do believe, I just read Bernardino, truly it is a simple thing to go, okay, I remember making that suggestion when Froome and Sky were all the debate. Go easy, release your data, because I would love to see UCI go, okay, mandatory 2 times a year, you go down to do a VO2 max, everybody's an SRM, every calculated. You measure their hematocrit, you do a blood test to make sure there's nothing else there, because you could, if you know what you're doing, you could cheat it. But you can't if you blood test it, and you could get a baseline, and everything is driven off of oxygen. And if you have a VO2 max of 83 and you're doing 6.8, you can't do it. It's simple. He's cheating. Somebody's cheating. So it's really as simple to have transparency, but teams think it's competitive. I don't think it matters because you know who's better. I mean, would Pogacar go, I got 100 milliliters of VO2 max. I mean, it might discourage everybody though, for certain. But they're already discouraged, so they're already given up anyways. So anyways, I guess I'm getting, I don't know where I was going with this, but because we got sidetracked. I was just talking about, performance. I don't know where I got off. I got off track there. Well, it's an interesting subject.
I'm still on page 1 of 4 here.
Okay.
We've got 10 minutes left. I remember I wrote this in the book. I wrote a chapter about Greg in one of my books, and I phoned you up and asked you a question, and the dictaphone ran for 39 minutes before I spoke enough. It's 8 pages of a transcript. But I want to talk. When I was 16, I was in France that summer, and it was the summer you won the 1989 Tour de France, which, to me personally, my opinion, and just for me, it's the greatest bike race there has ever been. It's the way it swung between you and Fignon backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. That rarely happens. You usually get
except recently. I mean, I'm saying Pogacar, it's been exciting lately, but I'm saying, but that is what makes cycling exciting, is that duel.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's why it's such a great race. But it was also a kind of a clash of cultures between you are the most modern thinking, technologically advanced rider in the sport, and Fignon kind of represented I know Fignon was very, he was pretty scientific as well, but he represented the old school, and there was kind of clash of.
And I was by myself, and he had the super team. I literally was by myself. Yeah, true. No,
but that was it. So it was also an underdog with a small team against a big team. It was the guy from the original cycling country, France, against the guy from America. It works on so many levels. It just inspired me in the sport. So could you just share a few of your memories of that tour and why you think you were able to win it?
Well, let's just say, I was almost ready to quit the sport in May. We went to the Treville first 10 minutes the first stage, and then, I look back now and I looked at results. Actually, I think the 6th place in Tirreno, and I did okay in Criterium International. I'm like, oh, it wasn't so bad. There was glimmers of hope there, and then I just thought about it today, and I'm going, okay, but what I forgot was I wasn't getting paid at all. I was supposed to, from the team, and they kept telling me, next week I'll have your car, next week. And not a dime came in, and it was 2 days before Liège-Bastogne-Liège, and I cracked a little bit with stress, and I just got drunk. I screw these guys, I'm not doing Liège-Bastogne-Liège. My brother-in-law, I think, was there, and we had a lot of margaritas, let's say, and but I was not going to do it because you want me to race, you got to pay me, and they came to my house the next day, and I was really hungover. But anyways, I just took off back to the U.S. because I thought I cracked it. I took about almost 3 weeks just off thinking what I wanted to do. And then I got back on my bike, did the Tour de Trump, believe it or not. And I was 3 weeks of no riding. I was really in trouble. I mean, but then I went to the Giro the next week. So when I look back now, I mean, you kind of forget, but there's a reason I also started that was, not great. But it was mainly because for 2 years, you imagine going from the winning the Tour and never really suffering, truly like suffering, and then going to the worst part of the peloton, the tail end, and every race was like pushing myself harder than winning the Tour, and it became just like suffering. And I never saw the light at the end of the tunnel, and that was kind of the breaking point for me. But because I still remember midway through the Giro, and this is the day I had a couple, you got to relieve the pressure, but I just remember Trey Chimo Everett, and I saw Stephen Roche drop me, and he took off, and I said, I can't believe I was that good. I don't think I'll ever be that good. And I lost 17 minutes that day, and I just called my wife, said, I debate. I think she might have been there. But anyways, I just said, I can't do it. I got to quit. I want to quit, like the next day. And I just said, I can't do this anymore. And she just said, Craig, you can quit. You can quit. But don't quit tomorrow. Just give it to the end of the year. Anyways, it was a little bit of pressure about release, but crazy. At the same time, the team had a doctor come down there, and my Otto Jacome was my Mexican masseur, no medical background or anything, but he, hey, Champ, he always called me Champ. Champ, you look like a woman who's menstruating. You're great. Like you don't have, so he thought I was low in iron, and it turns out I was anemic. So Armstrong always claimed I took EPO that race because when I told everybody, I publicly had a journalist, John Wilkin, there, watch me take the iron. But I got 3 iron shots, and I do believe it really, because I'd lost so much blood back in 87. Even though you can build your blood up, you still use a lot of iron, and which binds oxygen. So I don't know, that pressure break, the iron, it rained, my allergies went down, and all of a sudden, 4 days later, I felt my legs were really good. And finally, at the end of the Giro, I had a second place in the last time trial, about 1 minute and 21 seconds in front of Fignon. That was a great hope, but even then, when I started the Tour, my hope was just a stage win. But I got 4th place in the prologue, and usually I know if I'm in the top 5 in the prologue, that's a really high intensity, and I'm like, I'm in pretty good shape. But I had zero confidence, so the next time trial I won it, took the yellow jersey, but I had low confidence myself, and I kept waiting to get dropped in the very first mountain stage in Côte d'Orée, and I passed that one. But I was at my limits. I wasn't like floating on it. In 86, honestly, I had never had a hard day. I mean, Lapta was a training ride with Hino. I never suffered. And in that race, I was at my limits the whole time. And so it looks like, and that's why it was exciting, I wasn't that much better than Fignon. We were so close. And, I took the jersey, lost it. But just to be back at the Tour to me was like a dream. And it's so weird. I mean, when I started, I truly believed if I showed up at the Tour in good shape, nobody's going to beat me. And I really believe that. Wasn't so confident at that point, but every time I would make it through one more stage, I'm like, okay, top 20, top 5, top 10, top 5.
And how did it feel to be deep in that kind of backwards and forwards, very close battle?
It was the best feeling. I mean, even if I didn't win the Tour, it was like so great to be back to where I was in 86, because I'd never really suffered before that. I mean, truly, like I got a cold in the 84 Tour, and it was true that actually the 84 Tour put such an impression on me. And within 3 days, I had bronchitis, and I was on antibiotics, and first stage of the Pyrenees, I was getting dropped, and Guimard kept the team around, kept me going. I ended up being getting third until got 2 days in Grenoble, got 2 days of recovery, and bounced back up. But that was such an impression that it was so hard. Even the next year, I was really cautious, because I was traumatized how hard the Tour was. And then I found myself in 85, oh my God. I kind of watched Hino just walk away. I didn't want to push myself in the first stage, and I, so my tours before '89 were just really physically easy, mentally. That's why I said when you see Pogacar, you go, like, I didn't suffer in '89, and so '86, and I could see what he's at his perfect time where he's that much better, and he's just at his prime. And sometimes you get the rides and periods where you're just better than that. '89 was not that. So it was, but to be back there, just even competing was a miracle. But I just lived for the tour. Even today, I said, I was telling somebody earlier tonight, I still dream of doing the Tour de France at least 3 or 4 times a year. It's crazy. And I just said this probably to you. The last dream, like 3 months ago, I'm at the Tour de France, my old team GAN. I talked to Roger, he lets me into the stage, but I gotta find my own bike. But I'm in the tour, and I'm a week into it, and I'm actually still there, but before the mountain stage. And I'd say to myself, what the hell am I doing here? I'm 63 and 50 pounds heavier. Then I quit. But that's how powerful the Tour de France was for me, like this. I loved it. And we were talking about hunger. Pogacar has hunger, but it's a passion. You gotta have hunger just is a byproduct of passion and loving what you're doing.
Yeah. And are you conscious of the impact and influence you've had on the world of cycling?
I don't know. Sometimes I go, I don't know, really. Honestly, in '89, I wanted, but I was so used to coming from the United States that nobody knew about cycling. And if I met somebody, even as far as world champion, let's say in '83, I'd meet people and go, what do you do for a living? I said, sports marketing. I didn't even want to explain that I was a pro cyclist. And so there's no coverage in the US. And then '83, they started covering the Tour de France. And finally, slowly, my first tour, '85 and '86, '84 and '85, were on TV. So there were people in the United States getting into it. But it was not until '89 that really, I believe, made that impact. But the only time, I've only watched that '89 tour, Phil Liggett's version of it, which was voiced over. It was kind of done for World Cycling Production, so I never saw the actual live deal. And I'm kind of like, I could barely watch that video anymore because it sounds so dull. Then I watched the Tour de France French version, and I'm like, wow, this is exciting. Yeah. Then I got it why it was so exciting, because it was the way it was played, the back and forth. But I only years later did I realized, well, like what it happened, what it did in the United States, which is really great. It's really great. I'm so happy I found cycling. It's such a special sport, and that I did impact people, and I still meet people today, many in here that told me they got in cycling, seeing that, and they're still riding their bikes, and that's what's really great. Yeah.
See that clock in the corner of the screen? We're into minus numbers, okay. Unfortunately. So I just want to say, on behalf of all the people at Rouleur, all the helpers of Rouleur Live, all the public at Rouleur Live, Greg LeMond, thank you very much for having been an absolute.
Great to be here. Thank you.